Hey, hold up. What were you doing inside the courthouse?
Leaving work. Am I being detained?
I need ID. Stay right here till I verify you.
Verify what? That a black man can walk out of a public courthouse?
Need a second unit. Possible suspicious subject.
You're about to create a federal incident on the courthouse.
It was 4:28 p.m. on a weekday afternoon. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with attorneys' staff and spectators spilling out after a long session. Sunlight cut sharply across the stone plaza, reflecting off glass and polished shoes. He walked alone, descending the steps with a leather briefcase tucked under his arm. Black man, mid-40s, tailored navy suit, calm, unhurried pace. The posture of someone used to courtrooms and deadlines. Behind him, a police cruiser rolled forward slowly. Tires whispered against the curb. The engine idled. A door opened. "Sir, hold up a second." He stopped and turned. The officer approached with measured steps, one hand resting near his belt, eyes scanning the briefcase, the suit, the face. "Can I help you?" the man asked. The officer tilted his head toward the building. "What were you doing inside the courthouse today?" The question was framed as casual. "It wasn't. I was attending court," he replied. The officer nodded, unsatisfied. "For what reason?" "For work." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you have identification?" The man glanced around. Lawyers were still passing. A clerk paused near the steps. Someone slowed, sensing tension. "Am I being detained?" he asked. The officer shifted his stance. "I just need to make sure everything checks out." "Checks out!" The man exhaled slowly. "I am leaving a public courthouse. I have not committed any violation." The officer raised his radio. "I'm going to need a quick verification." A second cruiser rolled closer. The sound drew attention. Phones began to lift. Whispers cut through the afternoon air. "Sir," the officer said, voice firmer now, "I need you to stay right here." The man did not move. He set his briefcase gently on the ground. "You are making an error," he said calmly. The officer met his eyes. "We'll see about that." In front of a building dedicated to justice, a black man walking away from his own argument before the court was now being treated as a question that needed answering. And everyone watching could feel it. This was not about procedure. It was about suspicion. His name was Marcus Reed. Outside legal circles, it meant nothing. Inside them, it carried extraordinary weight. Marcus Reed did not come from power. He came from discipline. His mother was a public school teacher who graded papers late into the night. His father worked maintenance at a municipal building and taught him that rules mattered most when they were applied fairly. From an early age, Marcus learned that excellence was not optional. It was armor. He earned scholarships not because anyone expected him to, but because he outworked everyone else. In college, he studied constitutional law obsessively, not as theory, but as lived consequence. In law school, professors noted his restraint. He never spoke unless he was prepared. When he did, the room listened. His career moved upward quietly. Federal clerkships, appellate litigation, arguments that turned on single words, and precedent built over decades. He became known for clarity under pressure. No theatrics, no ego, just command of the law. Years later, Marcus Reed was appointed Solicitor General of the United States, the government's chief advocate before the Supreme Court. The final voice defending federal law at the highest level. A role defined by credibility. One misstatement could ripple across the legal system. He argued cases that shaped civil rights, executive power, criminal procedure. He stood at the lectern beneath marble columns and answered questions that could alter the nation's direction. He did it with precision and restraint. That afternoon, he had just finished oral arguments. A routine appearance. Complex but familiar. He gathered his notes, closed his briefcase, and exited the courthouse the same way he always did. On foot. Alone. No escort. No announcement. The officer who stopped him knew none of this. Officer Daniel Brooks had been on the force for 9 years. His evaluations praised initiative and vigilance. He prided himself on being proactive. Supervisors liked that he did not hesitate. Complaints existed, but none had stuck. Mostly about tone, about stops that went nowhere. Brooks believed patterns told stories. Who lingered? Who left quickly? Who looked like they belonged? He trusted his instincts, especially in high-traffic areas like courthouses, where he believed anything unusual required attention. When he saw Marcus leave alone, briefcase in hand, eyes forward, something felt off to him. Not illegal, just unfamiliar. That feeling became justification. Brooks did not consider that authority often moves quietly. He did not consider that the most powerful legal officer in the country might look exactly like a man leaving work. Two careers shaped by the law were now intersecting on courthouse steps. One built on interpreting the Constitution at its highest level, the other on enforcing it in moments of judgment. And in the space between them, assumption was already filling the gap where verification should have been. The courthouse steps began to change shape. What had been a steady flow of people slowed as attention fixed itself on the encounter. Marcus stood where he had stopped, shoulders relaxed, briefcase resting at his side. He did not pace. He did not argue. He waited. Officer Brooks stepped closer, closing the space with intention. His eyes moved from Marcus's hands to his jacket pocket, then back to his face. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," Brooks said. Marcus nodded once. "Before I do that, am I being detained?" Brooks hesitated. The pause was brief but noticeable. "You're being stopped for questioning," he replied. "Questioning for what?" Brooks shifted his weight. "We've had security concerns, people leaving without clear purpose." Marcus glanced back at the courthouse doors. Lawyers were still exiting in clusters. A clerk paused near the rail. A man in a gray suit slowed phone already angled toward the scene. "I just exited a public courtroom," Marcus said. "That is a clear purpose." Brooks raised his radio slightly. "Dispatch, I'm conducting a field interview outside the courthouse. Stand by. Stand by." The words carried farther than intended. A second officer began moving closer from across the plaza. Conversations around them dropped to whispers. Sir Brooks said, voice firmer now. "I need you to remain here until we're done." Marcus met his eyes. "You have not articulated reasonable suspicion." Brooks's jaw tightened. "You don't need to lecture me on the law." A woman near the steps murmured to her companion, "Is this really happening?" Another voice answered quietly, "This is ridiculous." Phones were no longer subtle. Recording was open now. No one pretended not to see. Marcus felt the calculation taking place. Brooks had committed publicly. Each additional witness made retreat harder. Verification would mean admitting error. Escalation felt safer. Officer Marcus said calmly, "I am asking you to state the basis for this stop." Brooks stepped closer again. His presence filled the space deliberately. "Sir, if you do not cooperate, this will escalate." Escalate from what Marcus asked, from me walking away from work. The second officer stopped a few feet away, uncertain. His eyes moved between Brooks and Marcus, then to the gathering crowd. This was no longer a private judgment call. It was a public test. Marcus remained still. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for anything. "I will comply with lawful orders," he said. "But this stop is not lawful." The words landed cleanly, precise, recorded. Around them, the plaza had gone quiet enough to hear the wind move across stone. What began as suspicion had become spectacle. And everyone watching understood the same thing. This was no longer about security. It was about whether authority would choose verification or force when challenged by facts. The moment shifted without warning. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Officer Brooks took a half step closer. His shoulders squared. His voice dropped into the tone used when decisions were no longer negotiable. "Sir, place your hands where I can see them and step over here." Marcus did not move immediately. He looked past Brooks at the courthouse doors, at the seal carved into stone at the place where the Constitution was argued minutes earlier. "Am I being detained?" he asked again. Brooks did not answer. He reached out and touched Marcus's arm. The contact was brief, firm, directive. A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd. Someone said, "That's not necessary." Another voice followed. "He hasn't done anything." Marcus felt the grip settle just above his elbow. Not violent, not gentle, the kind meant to establish control. "I am not resisting," Marcus said clearly. Brooks guided him a step to the side away from the main flow of people. Shoes scraped against stone. The sound carried farther than it should have. "Sir Brooks said you are being temporarily detained pending verification." Verification that had been available from the beginning. Marcus's heart rate increased, but his posture remained steady. He understood the significance of the moment. A stop without reasonable suspicion. Physical control without legal basis. In full public view. Phones were fully raised now, recording openly. No attempt at discretion. The plaza had become a courtroom of witnesses. The second officer moved closer, uncertain. He glanced at Brooks, then at Marcus, then at the crowd. His hesitation was visible. Marcus turned his head slightly. "Officer, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Brooks's jaw tightened. "Sir, I need you to stop talking." The instruction landed heavy. Silence was being demanded, not compliance. Brooks's hand tightened again, repositioning Marcus a few inches farther from the steps. Not enough to justify force. Enough to assert dominance. From the edge of the crowd, someone shouted, "This is illegal!" Another voice said, "Let him go." Brooks ignored them. He spoke into his radio. "Need a supervisor at the front steps." Marcus stood still. He did not pull away. He did not argue further. He memorized details instead. The time on the courthouse clock. The badge numbers. the angles of the cameras mounted above the entrance. This was not confusion. This was not caution. This was a detention created by instinct and sustained by ego. In front of a federal courthouse, a man who had just defended the law at its highest level was being treated as a threat for simply leaving. And everyone watching understood the same thing. The injustice was no longer abstract. It was happening. Right here, right now. The supervisor arrived without urgency, and that alone changed the air. He stepped out of his cruiser, middle-aged, practiced calm eyes, trained to assess scenes before assigning blame. His gaze moved from the gathered crowd to Officer Brooks, then to Marcus, standing still at the center of it all. "What's going on?" the supervisor asked. Brooks answered quickly. "Suspicious activity." Subject refused to cooperate after leaving the courthouse. The supervisor turns to Marcus. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" Marcus did not hesitate. Marcus Reed. The supervisor nodded, once waiting. "And your reason for being inside the courthouse today?" Marcus met his eyes. "I argued a case." The supervisor paused. "Argued?" "Yes," Marcus said, "on behalf of the United States." The supervisor's expression shifted slightly. Subtle but unmistakable. "Which case?" Marcus named it. "A federal appeal argued earlier that afternoon." The title alone carried weight. The supervisor stepped back half a pace. He raised his radio. "Dispatch, can you confirm identity?" Marcus Reed. There was a pause, longer than any before. Then the voice came back clearer now. "Confirmed. Marcus Reed, United States Solicitor General." The plaza went quiet. The supervisor's posture changed immediately. Shoulders straightened, his tone softened. "Sir," he said carefully, "I apologize for the delay." Brooks turned sharply. "Solicitor General." Marcus nodded once. The second officer exhaled audibly. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's the Solicitor General." Phones shifted, zoomed. The supervisor turned to Brooks. "Did you verify his identity before initiating detention?" Brooks hesitated. He did not answer. The supervisor's jaw tightened. "You detained the chief legal advocate of the federal government without articulating reasonable suspicion." Brooks stared straight ahead now. The confidence that carried him moments earlier was gone. Marcus spoke quietly. "This is not about who I am." The supervisor looked back at him. "It's about what you were prepared to do before you knew." The supervisor nodded once. "Understood." He turned to Brooks. "Release him, now." The physical space around Marcus opened immediately. Hands dropped. Distance returned. What had felt tight seconds earlier dissolved. Marcus picked up his briefcase. He adjusted his jacket. No dramatic movement. No victory posture. The supervisor addressed him again. "Sir, on behalf of the department, I apologize for this stop." Marcus met his eyes. "This should never have required my title." The supervisor did not disagree. Around them, the plaza began to breathe again. Conversations restarted in low tones. Phones stayed raised a moment longer, then slowly lowered. The truth had landed without spectacle. And with it, the balance of power had reversed completely. What had been framed as suspicion minutes earlier was now unmistakably documented as a failure, not of identity, of judgment. The footage surfaced before sunset. A law clerk posted the first clip. Grainy but steady. Marcus standing on the courthouse steps. The officer's hand on his arm. The crowd closing in, no commentary, just sequence. By nightfall, national outlets were running it on loop. Former prosecutors paused mid-sentence on television. Legal scholars leaned forward, replaying the stop frame by frame. The same question echoed across platforms. How does this happen outside a federal courthouse? Marcus did not post the video. He did not issue a statement that day. He returned to his office, reviewed briefs, and prepared for the next argument. The work continued. The response inside the department did not wait. Internal Affairs opened a review within hours. Body camera footage, radio traffic, dispatch logs, supervisor response times, everything preserved, nothing filtered. The findings were immediate and uncomfortable. No reasonable suspicion articulated, no crime alleged, no threat observed. A stop initiated on instinct. A detention prolonged by refusal to reassess. Physical control applied without legal basis. Officer Brooks was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The notice was brief. The implication was not. Civil rights organizations filed formal complaints by morning. Bar associations issued statements by afternoon. The courthouse itself released a rare acknowledgement. This should not have occurred. Marcus addressed the incident 2 days later. One paragraph. No emotion. The rule of law does not bend to convenience. It fails when assumption replaces verification. The department announced corrective measures within the week. Mandatory supervisor approval for courthouse detentions. Enhanced training on reasonable suspicion standards. Audits of stops initiated in high-profile public spaces. Brooks's disciplinary hearing moved quickly. The evidence left little room for interpretation. Policy violations were sustained. His badge was suspended, then revoked. The decision was final. No parade, no press conference. Marcus declined to pursue civil damages. He did not frame the incident as personal harm. He framed it as institutional failure. The impact extended beyond one officer. Departments across the region reviewed their courthouse protocols. Training bulletins circulated. Roll calls included reminders about stops, detentions, and the limits of authority. The plaza outside the courthouse returned to normal within days. People walked. Arguments ended. Cases continued. But something fundamental had changed. Officers paused longer before acting. Supervisors asked more questions. Verification moved ahead of instinct. Justice did not arrive with outrage. It arrived with documentation and consequences that could not be ignored. You did not need to know who Marcus Reed was to understand what went wrong. You only needed to see what happened before anyone knew. What happened to Marcus Reed was not a close call. It was a clear failure to meet the most basic legal standard governing police conduct. Under the Fourth Amendment, a stop requires reasonable suspicion based on specific and articulable facts. Leaving a courthouse after oral arguments does not qualify. Clothing posture or solitude do not transform lawful behavior into suspicion. When officers initiate stops based on instinct rather than evidence, they invert the constitutional order. Detention escalates that failure. Physical contact, restriction of movement, and commands to remain are seizures of liberty. Without lawful justification, each step compounds the violation. The law does not excuse this conduct because it occurs calmly or without overt force. Illegality is measured by basis, not tone. But the legal analysis alone is incomplete. This incident reveals how bias often operates beneath professionalism. It does not announce itself with hostility. It presents as vigilance, as intuition, as a belief that something feels off. In high-security environments, that feeling is frequently validated rather than questioned, especially when the person stopped does not match an unspoken image of authority. Marcus Reed followed every expectation society places on minimizing risk. He was calm, he was respectful, he asked precise questions, he complied with instructions, he did not argue loudly or resist physically, and still he was detained. That matters because it dismantles a persistent myth. That knowledge of the law protects you. That proximity to power shields you. That professionalism guarantees fair treatment. It does not. So what should viewers take away? First, understand your rights. You may ask whether you are being detained and on what basis. Officers must articulate reasonable suspicion. Vague references to security concerns are not enough. Second, recognize escalation signals. When verification is available but ignored, when questions turn into commands, when physical positioning replaces explanation, the encounter has shifted from inquiry to control. At that point, safety may require compliance in the moment and accountability afterward. Third, document when legally possible. Video does not provoke misconduct. It preserves context. Witnesses constrain narratives. Records prevent revision. Finally, consider the broader cost. Stops without cause erode trust, normalize arbitrary authority, and teach officers that instinct outranks law. Systems that tolerate this behavior do not fail suddenly. They fail gradually, one unquestioned stop at a time. Marcus Reed did not need his position to deserve constitutional protection. He needed the Constitution to be applied consistently. His experience is not exceptional because of who he is. It is revealing because of what happened before anyone knew. The question is not whether this stop was unlawful, that is clear. The question is how many similar stops end without witnesses, without video, and without correction. And how long justice can endure when suspicion is allowed to replace law.